Hi, folks. Welcome to a very special encore presentation of Enterprise Security Weekly. The hosts and production crew are taking the week off, so we're flashing back to episode 247. This was a great one. For this one, I interviewed Adam Janofsky, founder and editor of The Record, which is Recorded Future's media outlet. We discuss what it's like setting up a small niche media outlet for a vendor as opposed to working for a big media firm like the one that Adam came from, the Wall Street Journal. Then we discuss what they learned from interviewing folks who worked for ransomware groups, actual cybercriminals. It's a super interesting interview that I think you'll love. Enjoy the episode.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
And for today's interview, we've got a really special one for you. Adam Janofsky joins us. He's the editorial director at The Record, which is a publication funded by Recorded Future, well-known cybersecurity intelligence provider. He also spent some time at the Wall Street Journal. Very interesting background, Adam. You know, you're a video journalist. You know, it's not just print. You know, you've done a variety, or print and digital. You've done a variety of different mediums. Well,
yeah.
Sorry. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time. And it's the switch from going to legacy print publication, the Wall Street Journal, where you actually could hold up a physical copy of the paper, toward the printing press is very different from most publications nowadays, which includes The Record. No printing press that we're operating right now, but who knows, maybe in the future.
Yeah, who knows? It could, vinyl's still around, right? Anything can happen.
Yeah, maybe it'll be retro where people are holding on to newspapers as kind of a vintage, nice little collector's item, probably.
When you joined the Wall Street Journal, journalists there get like a little, I don't know what they call it, like a sketch, like a drawing. Yep. Your portrait. Was that a big deal getting that for you? Yeah,
in the industry, they're called a stipple, and it's just a bunch of like little small dots that they have, I guess, trademarked in some way. But that was one of the big moments in my early journalistic career to get my own stipple drawing. And when I left the publication, they gave me like a little printout of it, and I keep it next to me in the other room. But it's a fun thing to have, a nice memento.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I love that they still keep to traditions like that. You know, even though a lot of things about the media industry are changing. You know, like the fact that everybody's got a podcast now, right?
Yep. I mean, I feel like even my grandmother has a podcast, which I would listen to it. I'm not trying to bash anyone. It's great that the podcast industry is going through a revolution. I think that the more podcasts that are out there, the better for people.
Yeah, same. And I think it's a good lead into one of my first questions. You're kind of part of this revolution where now we're seeing a lot of publications, kind of born out of these cybersecurity companies. I'm sure they're probably doing it in other industries as well, but I'm mainly aware of it, in this field here. And I wonder what that transition is like. Like, do your other journalist friends look at you as if you've sold out? Because I know a lot of these publications have really good reputations. Duo Security's got Decipher, Kaspersky's had SecureList, Sophos has Naked Security. And I know a lot of folks who have just kind of transitioned back and forth between dedicated media companies and some of these publications that are vendor funded.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely like an interesting, unique kind of situation. And I think cybersecurity is particularly suited to those kinds of publications because it is such a news-based industry. Like, people need quick information. They need accurate information. They need factual information, whether it's about a threat group that's attacking their network or about like some action taken by the NSA or CISA or whoever it may be. It's definitely news driven, which I think kind of contributes to the reason why you've seen so many of those blogs. And just with the record and recorded future, I mean, it fit into Recorded Future's kind of vision of intelligence information in the same way that kind of like the model that we've been going after is Bloomberg News. So they were a financial news information business, and they started a publication to kind of be the public source of news for that. And we're kind of doing the same thing with cybersecurity. So it's definitely, we're not the first ones to try this, but we're hoping to be kind of the Bloomberg of cybersecurity.
Very nice. And were you the one tapped to kind of create this and like figure out what it was going to look like and feel like and kind of set some of the rules around it?
Yeah, I was the first person that they hired as a journalist, and it was a new experience for me to be the one journalist in an organization of like 500, security analysts and salespeople and marketing people. Definitely a very different environment from the Wall Street Journal. But fortunately, that was a year ago, and we now have about 5 reporters, some freelancers who are writing articles every day. So it's not as isolating and alone as it was back then. But it's definitely been just kind of a wild ride of creating your own publication. It's not just about writing the news stories and finding the interviews, but it's about maintaining a website and all these other things that I never had to think about when I was just a cog in the machine of a publication that had thousands of people.
Right. I've got to imagine you want to have some semblance of separation and independence from Recorded Future at the same time, because if all the experts you source quotes from are people who work at Recorded Future, personally, I'd worry a little bit about that. So I'm sure you go outside for some of that stuff.
Yeah, actually, most of the stuff comes from outside of Recorded Future, and they've been extremely. I mean, like when they hired me, they kept referencing Bloomberg as sort of what they're shooting for, and so they have been very good about creating that separation, giving us independence, and so they have never told us what story to write or what story not to write. And when we go ask for experts, yes, sometimes we report on news that Recorded Future breaks, but we also just as often go to their competitors, and we haven't really had any pissed off people within the company about that. They understand what we're doing.
Excellent. So you're 5 people now at the Record. Is there anything that you wish you had that you miss from your days at the Wall Street Journal, days where you're like, man, I wish we had a copy desk or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something where it's like a little bit of the startup life where you just kind of keep going, and if there's a wall, then you find a solution, you climb it. But yes, having a copy editor or a fact checker or someone who's just devoted 100% to some very niche part about the publication, whether it's, headline writing, that's not something that you can have with 5 people. So I do miss that kind of stuff, but also I don't miss the bureaucracy of having 5 different editors for a single story. So maybe eventually we'll get to that point, but until then, I'm fine being a little bit smaller and a little bit more stealthy.
Or working on a story and somebody deciding that, no, you don't get to publish it, or they want to go in a different direction, right?
Yeah, spiking it. Rupert Murdoch isn't calling down from the penthouse suite of the Wall Street Journal's office yelling at you. That never actually happened to me, but
oh, nice. Who's this Adam guy? I have no idea what he sounds like. He's British, isn't he?
Yeah, Australian or British, not born in America.
Yeah. So, these 5 people you managed to pull over, I think, one of the industry's most prolific journalists, Caitlin Campanu, if I'm saying his name right. How'd you pull that off?
I think he was also interested. He was the first reporter that we brought on, and he is just absolutely fantastic at what he does. Truly an eye-opening experience to work alongside someone as great of a writer and as diligent of a reporter as Catalina is. And I think he was attracted to the project in the same reason that I was attracted to it. He wanted to build something big. He wanted to build, as I said before, kind of the Bloomberg of cybersecurity. And yeah, he's based in Romania, which gives us kind of closer to a 24-hour news cycle, even though we're a small operation.
You can act like a bigger one. No, it definitely helps having somebody like that as the first journalist there. Absolutely, you got to a heck of a start. And on top of that, you've got a Russian-speaking analyst with an interesting background. Like with only 5 people, the amount of stuff you can do already is pretty impressive.
Yeah. So you're talking about Dmitry Smilyanets, who is he's a security analyst at Recorded Future. He's not a reporter, but it kind of speaks to the unique opportunities that we have being a publication that's sort of like connected to a security company. So Dmitry, he doesn't write articles for us, but what we have done in the past several times is that he has tons of connections to the, cyber criminal underground, and he interviews some of these professionals regularly just to sort of know what they're thinking about. And then based on those interviews, he, publish excerpts from them, publish full interviews with some context with the editor's notes. But the idea is to get some of the, narratives and stories that you would never read in other publications.
Yeah. So, getting into some of the stuff Dmitry has done, on the one hand, it seems incredible that you got some of these ransomware crew, of course, anonymously, on the record, to give an interview. But at the same time, some of the stuff they say, the more and more we look at how these operations are running, they just look like businesses, down to the desire for marketing, for PR, right? And it seems like some of them are looking at these interviews as a PR opportunity where maybe you don't even have to really talk them into it. They're already down for it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of case by case. Some of them, they would never talk to a journalist like myself, and I've tried, and it can actually be a mistake if you don't know what you're doing. You can end up being targeted by them. But having someone like Dmitry who has actually operated on that side of the space, really can speak their language, literally can sometimes speak in Russian to them if they're based in Russia. It kind of gives that more credibility. And I think they open up more to someone like Dmitry rather than myself, or definitely law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement rarely gets these kinds of interviews. And we've heard from, the White House, we've heard from Secret Service members, FBI members, that these interviews sort of have given them revelations about how these people think, how they get attracted to this industry, in a way that they just don't really get very often, because as you probably know, like, it's very rare that you can actually get an arrest, especially if the operators stay in a country like Russia and never face extradition.
And so it seems like Dimitri's probably, the cog or the lodestone that kind of makes that work, right? The keystone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So sounds like, and it's interesting that you've gotten sounds like some positive feedback from government organizations? Because it sounds like you've maybe gotten some negative feedback. People that kind of question the ethics of interviewing cyber criminals, giving them some airtime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely, whenever we publish these interviews, Twitter is kind of a mess for the next 24 hours involving our account. It's definitely, like, I'd say probably like 70% of the feedback that we get is like, whoa, like, you have to read this interview. I've never read anything like this. Or other publications that are like, Revol is saying that they specifically go after cyber insurers. And then you get maybe 10 to 20% of people who are saying, like, I can't believe that we're having this conversation again. You shouldn't be interviewing cyber criminals. It just gives them a platform. And I mean, to be honest, like, it's a tough editorial decision. I don't pretend that I know the exact right answer. I think that there's a case that can be made for both. And I understand the concern that some people have voiced. But I do think that the feedback that we've gotten from the White House, from law enforcement agencies, it does sort of give me reassurance that they are worth publishing.
Yeah, in my research for this interview, I saw some of those tweets that you're talking about. Some of the responses to Dmitry calling him an FBI mouthpiece. Chuckled at that a little bit.
Definitely some harsh words that have been thrown.
Yeah. And I love that Dmitry ends each interview with the same question. He's like, "Tell me a secret."
Yeah, that's his like little signature trademark. And
his sign off.
These people, again, yeah, they definitely open up. And I feel like that kind of open-ended question, you end up hearing things that you would never have even known to ask, I guess.
Yeah. And it's, there are, so, I think some of these interviews, it's what you'd expect, it's what we suspected or what we've heard through other channels, maybe through law enforcement who have done some arrests, and we get some insights into, the processes of these cyber criminals, the motives, how they spend the money, how much money they're getting. But it's still, even the stuff that isn't a huge surprise, I think it's still interesting hearing it directly from someone. And then some of them, there are some insights in there, that I feel like you wouldn't hear otherwise. But before we dive into some of those, I don't know if you've gone deep enough into it to be comfortable answering this question, but just talking about diving into some of these crews and how they operate a little bit. Could you help me understand the relationship between operators and affiliates? And are those like the two main groups? Am I getting that right?
Yeah. I mean, I am not like a super expert at this. Dmitry would be able to speak to it better than I can, but
we don't have to go super deep.
Yeah. So the way that ransomware has sort of evolved in the last couple of years, especially, is that it's kind of a service business where it's not just one person who is developing the malware, installing it on a victim's computer, dealing with the extortion. It's kind of like there's many different components of a single ransomware incident. And so you have like a developer of a strain of malware who might have like a name, like a notable ransomware name, but then they work with affiliates who might do things like buy access to an organization from the dark web and then buy the malware strain from the operator and then use that malware on the victim and try to get the money out. And there's a complicated pay structure with all of these, but generally when an incident happens, there's a lot of money involved, and there's a lot of different components that are getting like 5% here, 20% there. It's no longer very straightforward.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting things to me is, when you hear the names of some of these groups, like Revol, you tend to think that there's this one group that's doing 100% of it. Like they're developing the malware, they're getting the initial access into the victims, they're hitting the victims up for the ransom, and they're taking 100% of that payday that comes in, when it just sounds like it's much more distributed. And one of these companies that you've got an interview with doesn't even do any of the hacking. They seem like they're just a marketplace, kind of like a Silk Road, but for data.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, these marketplaces are expanding pretty rapidly. And it's when you talk to law enforcement, they use the term whack-a-mole very often, where even if they shut one down, it's like 5 pop up in its place. And these are the kinds of sites that cyber criminals, they don't just go to get access to victims. They don't just go to sell their malware or buy malware, but it's also just kind of a place to hang out in a lot of these situations and learn how to engage in cybercrime.
I think another thing that's kind of interesting for me, and I wonder if it's partially a culture thing, but like you look at some of the decisions that China makes, and just to use China as an example, nothing connected to what we're talking about, but where they'll make business decisions that to us look ethically reprehensible, and to them it's just if it works, it works. Is kind of the opinion there. And you hear some of the comments from these interviews, and I don't know if they feel a need to believe it themselves, or they really do believe that what they're doing could be seen as a service for companies that helps them be more secure.
Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to. Some of the individuals say things like, we're making the world a more secure place by engaging in these hacks, because we're raising the value of security. We're making it very obvious to other companies that they need to invest in this. Obviously, I think that's complete BS. It's like if you were a criminal who was going into banks and robbing them at gunpoint, it would be a hard argument to make when you get arrested and show up in court and try to say, I'm really just trying to make these banks better.
I'm trying security.
Yeah, they should be paying me for this service. Like, I don't know that I'm not sure. I guess that they're trying to make these kinds of arguments because we've, especially after incidents like Colonial Pipeline or JBS, you definitely see more that the pressure on law enforcement to do something about this is just at an all-time high. They're using terms like, cyber attacks can be a form of terrorism. You see threats from, all the way up to President Joe Biden, who says that there are red lines. And so I think that some of these groups are trying to sort of weasel their way out, try to create like a defense in case anything does happen to them, that they could say like, my heart was in a good place.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, the going rates for pen tests, I think they're not very competitive. Not that the recipients of these pen tests have any choice in the matter, but it was funny. One of the comments was, I think Dimitri asked if they ever thought about going straight, and the quick answer was, I could, but it's like 100x pay cut.
Yeah.
It's just, there's not enough money in it. But I think also one of the interesting things, especially reading 3 separate interviews, was looking at the commonalities between them. And one of those is, I think it's easy to look at all these crews as kind of, similar, the same kind of group. They're using some of the same techniques. They're using the same basic process, extortion process. But it's interesting to see that they compete with each other and they see each other as competitors, and that they each kind of have their own list of, what's hands off, what's out of play in terms of, no, we're not going to touch those industry for XYZ reasons so we can sleep at night. And it seems to be a slightly different list for each of them. And I found that interesting.
Yeah. And also it's kind of like the definitions of the list they kind of leave it open to interpretation, where, you can, a victim pops up that says like, we're a food, an agriculture company that's critical infrastructure. You said you wouldn't attack organizations like ours. And they say like, we never said anything about specifically like grain co-ops. So it's like there's so much vagary there.
Yeah. The farmers co-op or the meat processing company. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I mean, from a policy standpoint for the U.S., it's a huge list. When you look at that list of what is technically critical infrastructure, I think it's in some situations kind of tough to justify such an inclusive list.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And treat them all as like highest, most critical tier.
Yeah, I think that there's something like 16 or 17 different sectors, which all have their own subsectors. I guess everything in America is pretty critical.
Right. And we saw that through the whole pandemic, people saying, hey, I'm a server at a restaurant. I'm critical workforce, like really, really kind of stretching those definitions to get the most benefit out of them.
Mm-hmm. But it is interesting, in my opinion, that ransomware operators, they do seem to be like almost 100% focused on money, to the extent that they are going to hedge their risks. They're going to not go after certain companies because they think that there's a high risk of retaliation. There's so much talk lately about this gray line between state-sponsored attackers and cyber criminals. And I think that ransomware, for the most part, this kind of shows that a lot of these actors are kind of operating like traditional gangs, that they are doing it for financial reasons. They probably aren't that connected to political actors. And as long as there's money to be made, we're going to be seeing a lot more of these attacks.
It doesn't seem like a fuzzy line at all for me. If one group gets paid before they do the hack and another group doesn't get paid unless they pull it off right and they choose the right target, those are very different groups with very different motivations in how they choose those targets and how they treat those targets, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see. They all seem to pretty much agree, though, that in hindsight, some of these targets that they hit, and I remember saying that at the time, when we were talking on the podcast about Colonial Pipeline and the forget the name of the meat packing
JBS,
yeah. That in hindsight, they probably didn't intend to hit something that would, result in so much heat on them. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things that I found really interesting, because we were saying, that was probably a mistake on their part. They probably had no idea the levels of blowback that they would get from that. And they did seem to confirm that.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of questions that I think people have about these groups, going back to what you were saying a little while ago about sort of if they're, these groups are saying similar things, are they connected at all? Are they being run by the same people? And it's just like there are so many unknowns, and I feel like that's part of the motivating factor of why I'm personally so interested in like having an opportunity to ask them these questions and hear from them sort of what exactly is going on.
I'm here all day for it, man. Like one group, talking smack about Revil and how they're reckless, and them criticizing each other and seeing the competition between them. It's super interesting. But another thing, is just kind of that kind of iceberg component of it, where we certainly see a percentage of it, and some of those, what REvil did, what some of these, going after the wrong companies makes them look a little careless and reckless, like maybe they're not as sophisticated and good at what they're doing. But I think there's a huge piece, and I'm wondering if you're covering that outside of Dimitri's interviews, or if Recorded Future maybe has data intelligence on some of this, where it just goes so smoothly. These crews don't need to put it into the into the public. They don't need to contact media companies to get more focus on it. Like it just. I mean, personally, I've seen extortion cases where they price it so that a manager within a company or a director that has budget control can actually pay the ransom because they know how much money they can move without having to get it approved by the CFO. So I've seen cases where one person in a company is the only person that knows that this ransom got paid.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I wonder how much is below the surface, how much of that. And if that's something that you're looking at is the portion that goes smoothly that we never see because maybe some of these crews, are less reckless, are a little bit more savvy.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right about it being an iceberg. I'm not sure if it's 10% or 20% that we have visibility into, but that is something that we're actually looking at. And we've been doing a ransomware tracker for the last about 6 months or so. Where we try to scan every single ransomware attack that's publicly or semi-publicly available. Anything that has ever been reported on as a ransomware attack, we go to dark web forums. Anything that is mentioned on there is a ransomware attack. A lot of these operators have extortion sites where if you don't pay a ransom, then they'll post your name there. We track those. And we've especially been looking at things like attacks against hospitals, state and local governments, schools, and what we've seen is that there was a huge spike around December and January, and it's kind of decreased, maybe plateaued a little bit, but we're trying to get as much visibility into that as we possibly can, and all estimates that we've been able to find suggest that yes, it is not a good situation. There are a lot of attacks, and it seems like there are even, a factor of whether it's 5 or 10, who knows how many of attacks that happen that we never hear about because, again, it was like you're saying, it was paid off and it was swept under the rug, or it was affected like a small operation like a dentist's office, and no one ever really hears about it.
And it's having an impact on the industry too. We're seeing cyber insurance scramble, and we're seeing one of the new trends we talked about in the news segment of Enterprise Security Weekly a few weeks ago was that we're starting to see cyber insurance companies that are also product companies. So they're involved in some way with your security program. With some, it's just services. They're just kind of continuously looking at the status of your program and your systems and stuff like that, looking at metrics and things like that to make sure that you're not falling behind. But in other cases, these cyber insurance companies have their own security products that they're developing, and that that's part of the insurance is like they're actively involved and invested in making sure you don't get into a situation where you've got to pay out.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting that on both the criminal side, the insurance and remediation side, there's a lot of innovation and a lot of sort of motion and changes. It's an interesting time for the whole ecosystem.
So as we kind of wrap up here, one last question that's again probably another one of these tough editorial things. I've noticed especially in the Marketo conversation, which I just want to say Marketo makes it so hard to find information about that group because it's also a marketing technology company, and it's incredibly hard to Google and find information on that. But this whole aspect of these crews and how a lot of them actively use the media to put pressure on victims to pay. And there was a graphic in that story that might include, a brand that kind of hits close to home for us. And it's interesting because it's a list of partners, and they've got like the FDIC in there. They've got I think Department of Homeland Security, somebody like that was on there as partners, because in covering the fact that the ransom has happened. Yeah, I mean, you tell me, is that why they're calling these organizations partners? Is because by publicizing it, that creates pressure for the victim to pay?
Yeah, they're definitely stretching the definition of partner to the in the sense that they consider them a partner, but I'm sure no one on that list, including law enforcement agencies, see it as that way.
Sure.
But yeah, it's the idea is that they use those organizations as a tool to ultimately make money. That they say that they will, for example, tip off the FBI if someone refuses to pay, thinking that would sort of twist their arm a little bit. And media is absolutely sort of one of the components there.
And I think in other cases, I have seen some kind of angry Twitter exchanges where maybe some reporters are getting contacted directly by these crews and basically tapped to write the stories for them. It is the way I think some people are kind of looking at that, which is different from what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is kind of a editorial question that has been going on truly forever. How do you cover criminals? And it's not unique to cybersecurity. For example, like the Unabombers, threats that there were very serious decisions made in traditional newspapers of whether or not to publish that kind of material. So it's something that people have struggled with, and I don't think there's absolutely no consensus on it. And it's something that really every time that I get these interviews, I have to, it's not just thinking about how to present them, but do you want to present them at all? Is the benefit of publishing them, does it outweigh any sort of negative consequence? It's definitely something that takes a lot of thought and a lot of soul searching.
Yeah, definitely. So the website is therecord.media, is that correct?
Yep.
And you have a mailing list. Is that the best way to get notified of news stories?
Yeah, you can get every Sunday, you can get it on our newsletter that will just give you a list of our stories, or you can follow us on Twitter or just read us at therecord.media.
And you've got some video experience in your background. Any plans to, create a podcast, move into video, do anything other than just the digital delivery?
Yeah, that's actually something that we're working on right now for 2022. We just hired Dina Temple-Raston, who was NPR's main national security, cybersecurity reporter. And we're, definitely there's a lot in store next year in terms of expanding outside of our website, that I'll sort of leave that TBD.
Awesome.
It's a nice surprise.
Yeah. Thanks for the teaser there. Actually, in the news, we've started using the record quite a bit for a lot of the stories that we talk about. So we definitely appreciate a lot of that content.
We appreciate the links. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Adam, thank you so much for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Adrian.